I am a little bit embarrassed to admit to this, but this man here has probably been the best blessing to my Christian life, apart from the Lord Jesus Christ. I met Vinny when I was very young in my faith, only a month or so, and he got me into open airs almost instantly. So what you see of Off the Curb Ministries, me as a street preacher, even the way I communicate, it's really down to this man, and I'm not just saying that, you know. I remember the first open air I attended. There's a lady called Jill Evans who we're very fond of. And she I was just 18 years old, she sort of wrapped her arm around me and said, "It's great to have you at the open air." And she said, "As far as open air preachers go, there's none better than Vinnie Commons." We were a bit late, we were locking up the church, and as we walk into town, Vinny's there preaching in the open air. And sure enough, there was a big crowd of people listening. Now, if you are a street preacher, you really do need to listen to what Vinny's got to say here, because I think this will take your open air preaching to the next level, because Vinny's thought about these things for a very long time. So just tell us how long you have been street preaching for, Vinny.
Well, Joe, in 1979 I became a Christian at the age of 19, and then my very first street preach, I think, was in Ilfracombe, the southwest of England, on a Friday afternoon or Friday evening. And that was 82, 83. So
yeah, so it's a lot of years,
quite a few.
Yeah. So obviously people have got this kind of caricature of street preachers, and a lot of Christians don't want to touch it with a barge pole. They think, I'm not keen on that. What is it that you do that's different as a street preacher to, you know, the caricatural thinking of?
Well, first of all, in your attitude to kick off with is really important. And Warren Wiersbe, Bible teacher from the States, once said, "Do you love people or do you love preaching?" And that helped me in terms of my attitude, because we tend to think that we've got to preach and get this gospel out, and in our fervency that's a strength and that's good. But actually, when you look at Jesus in action, often he's asking questions and he's very interactive. And so I'm massive on interaction, and you know you're good at it because at the end of your talk somebody's there, or more than one person's there to talk to, and that proves that whatever you're saying and doing, it's holding a crowd.
That was one of the big impacts that Vinny had on my ministry. You used to say to me, you know, when you're in a church service, you've got all these people sitting there, but you've no idea whether they're with you or not. But in the open air, their feet tell you whether they're with you or not. So you learn how to communicate. And I often think the best preachers are those who've had some training in the open air. But what kind of lines might you use? What kind of questions might you use to stick people or get them to stop?
Well, first of all, remember that generally speaking, people don't go to church.
Yeah.
So you've got to say something that's interesting. Because when you say something is interesting, it arrests people, it stops them, and they stop, "Oh, never thought of that." So, for example, I might say, "Can you solve this problem?" And then straight away, they're thinking, "What problem?" So I then say, "This is the problem, how would you answer it?" Now, I might know the answer to it, but what I'm trying to do is engage with those people and make sure that they get into conversation with me. So a good line on lots of talks is, "Can you solve this problem?" Or "How would you go about solving this problem?"
Go on, give us an example of one of your talks where you would say about solving a problem.
Well, I might say something like this. I might say, "What happens next?" And I might put up MTW, what's next? Right? Now, they're thinking, what is MTW? Well, it's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, so they know the answer's Thursday, T. So, but straight away, they're with me. And then I say, now, what happens next? And I might choose June, July and August. So I go J, A, and the next one is S for September. But they're guessing that, see? And then I put up life, death, what happens next? And my question to them is, how do you know?
Yeah.
So straight away, you're asking them about something that will come their way sooner or later. They'll have life, they'll run out of life, and death they'll enter into. And the question will be, how do you know there's nothing next if you've never been?
And you use a board, don't you? You have visual aids. Just tell us about the power of having an open air board, because I'd say 90% of open air preachers, especially around the world, they don't use a board, or they don't have that kind of.
Well, it gives you a focal point, and also when you work in the open air, you're playing into the hands of a team. So in other words, you're doing a talk at the end of which people who are in your team can stop and say, "Thank you for stopping. I'm with that guy there. What did you think of that?" Now, if you don't have a board, then most people just keep walking, and all they hear without seeing is words. But it's very difficult for your team to feel part of the open air, because they're stopping somebody in the street and ask them a question, hoping they've tuned into this talk. But a board gives them a focal point and a visual point.
Helpful. So Vinnie Commons goes into the town centre and needs some new shoes, okay? And he's just walking around shopping as you do, and you hear a street preacher, you come across a street preacher, you've never seen them before, and you've done this over the years. What do you think when you listen in to these street preachers? What do you think it is that 99% of them miss? What do you think they're doing wrong, if we can say that, without being judgy, just trying to help them out?
Well, if you want to help somebody, just go up to them and say, "Excuse me, what are you hoping to achieve?" Because if he doesn't know what his goal is, he doesn't know whether he's a success or not, does he? So I say to them, "What are you trying to do today?" And he might say, "Well, I'm trying to get this message to them." But I might then say, "But have you ever thought that you're coming across as an angry young man?" Because sound is very important in the open air. And or you could be angry or grumpy or annoyed because you're frustrated that they're not stopping to hear this most wonderful message. So I ask the question, what are you trying to achieve? And how's the best way of achieving it, do you think? So the answer is, I am trying to achieve that I get into conversations so these people, having left me, are closer to the kingdom of heaven than when they first stopped. So that is the answer. But then you say, well, how do we do that? And of course, going back to your first question, Joe, if it's not interesting, they're not going to stop, are they?
That's right.
And it is a sin to preach the gospel boring.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Yeah, and I think it's helpful as well to ask your team members, what do they think of it. So just last week I was preaching, Vinny, and I used an illustration about when you go to a foreign country and you have cockroaches.
Oh yeah.
And you turn the light on, the cockroaches scuttle for the dark. And I said, that's what you and I are like, we scuttle for the dark. And I said it to a man, and then my team member came up to me and said, "You effectively just called that man a cockroach." I'm not sure that's the best method. I thought, do you know what, he's right there. So it's helpful to ask people. But something else you taught me as well is this: it's not about the street preacher at the front. It's not about the main man. It is about the team members there. So talk a bit about how can someone who says, I could never stand at the front and preach, but how could they support an open air? What are some things they can do?
Well, the reason you need a team is because, one, you can look odd by yourself. You can look extremist, and then people write off straight away. And if you notice, Jesus sent people out in pairs. But I also think it's good in terms of accountability. And also, if somebody said to me, or the police came and said, "Oh, you said this." Well, I've got somebody who said, "I'm sorry, you didn't say this, and I'm a witness." So that's good for you, and it's always good to have that. The best thing, of course, now these days is have your camera on and keep it going. So I think a team gives you that. Secondly, I can't talk to 10 people at once, but I can talk to one, maybe two. So I've lost another 8 if they've stopped. And so you're playing to the hands of your team. But you've got to make sure your team feel valuable, because if they just come out and they're cold and they're bored because nobody's really stopping or it's not working, it's very difficult to get out the second week, isn't it? So you want them to have something to do. So you've got to be aware that when you've got a good crowd, you don't need to finish all your talk. You can say, "Look, I'm going to stop there," and you can do it surprisingly. But it makes it very easy for your team just to turn and say, "Well, I'm with that chap. What did you think about that?" And it's going back to this: if you love people, you don't do massive long talks. You do effective talks, and you do them quite sharp but very interactive.
Yeah, and so what you were saying there is, if you're street preaching at the front and then a team member, you would say, if you see someone stop and listen,
Yes.
you think you should follow it up with that question, what did you think of my friend there?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the other thing, Joe, like happened last weekend in Southport in Merseyside, where I do a lot of preaching, a guy came and he was obviously religious and searching, but he was going around the houses.
Yeah.
So my friend, John, who was in the team, he took him to one side, and at that point, 4 other people came up and talked to me, and I had 4 really good chats because John took the problem to the side, and that really worked for me.
Yeah. Now, imagine you've got your team, okay, your team members, or even the guy at the front. You do get asked some pretty hard questions when you're in the open air.
I do.
Yeah. So, what would you say to someone who's really terrified, thinks, I don't know how I'm going to answer that question?
Well, the best thing to do is have a go, because experience is everything. So you want to get experience by having a go, so have a go. But as you go on, what you can do is you can do this. You can say, thank you for your question, and it's really important to be courteous and kind because people are always watching your reactions. So thank you for your question. Can I ask you a question? How would you answer it? Now that buys you time to think of your answer. So you can send the ball back into their court just for a few seconds while you gather your thoughts. If you know the answer, you can deliver it, but try and deliver it so again you're building your crowd. Okay, so somebody might say to me, well, what about all the people in the middle of, let's say, Africa or the Amazon jungle who've never heard? And I'll say, well, what do you think we should do about that problem? I mean, should we buy them a telephone? Do you see what I mean? And would you be willing to chip in?
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'm doing that, but I'm buying myself time.
Yeah, that's very
smart. And then
smart.
we get to the question.
Yeah, flip it back on them and then, yeah. So, do you think, a lot of Christians will say to me, Joe, it's not my gift though, that's not my calling. Do you think all Christians should be involved with open air work? What would you say to those guys?
Well, you've got to get rid of the idea that the person at the front is open air work. Because the number of times, Joe, you found this, and other speakers have found this, we needed people to support us, and there were people there asking big questions, but they've had to walk in or walk away into the abyss and not be spoken to because we haven't got a big enough team.
Exactly, yeah.
So the skill of open air work is the quiet one-to-one work. The guy at the front tees up them conversations if he's good.
That's it, yeah. I've had it where there's been 50 stopped and there's only been me and maybe one other person, and you just need more people there.
That's right, yeah.
So you did touch on the police a moment ago, yeah. So that is something that's become, especially in the UK, it's even been banned in a place a bit further south called Aldershot. How do we deal with the police? Is that a fear that we should be scared we're going to get arrested for street preaching? What do you think?
Well, first of all, don't be intimidated into silence, and that's happening all over the country. Just because a police person stops or somebody says, I'll report you, that's just words, isn't it? That I'll report you, that's just words. But often when the police come with me, I'll say this, officer, just give me 1 minute because I'm just finishing off. Just give me 1 minute with this crowd. Well, that 1 minute's crucial because the presence of the police gets another 20 people watching.
Yes, yeah.
And so I'm using their presence, so that's one little trick you can use. But then I say, I'll tell you why this open air message needs to get out. Because I'm taking a man who steals and is in prison or was in prison, costing the state thousands and thousands of pounds, and I'm making him kind and a giver. So actually, police, I'm doing you a big favour, I'm making your job easy.
That's a good line.
So I can do it that way.
Yeah,
I did that in Liverpool, believe it or not, 2 of the police started to clap and cheer. Yeah.
But you also used to tell me this when I was younger, like any idiot can get arrested, you used to say that. And there are street preachers that, when we're talking about it, is very hard to get people to listen, and you're trying all kinds of things. But if you want to get a big crowd, all you have to do is push these certain hot buttons. We won't mention them, but you know what we're talking about, these hot buttons.
Yeah.
And that gets them a massive crowd. But it also can get people's backs up and often get a police call, you know. So
Yeah.
what would you say to those guys who are particularly using those things to, you know, to wind people up?
I think it's a bit like modern day comedians.
Yeah.
There are very, very few good comedians. They resort to smut because they're not funny enough.
Yeah.
Now, good open air speakers, what they do is they work to a point where they can have a cordial chat with people. Okay. If you want to get a crowd, just say something off the wall.
Yeah.
You know? But if you notice, there must have been a stack of, let's say, abortion issues around when Jesus walked on earth. But he never went on a tirade on abortion, did he?
No, he didn't.
I mean, in the temple he said, go sin no more. And that one was caught in adultery, you know, it was a mess. But my point I'm making is there are issues he could have jumped on. But he avoided those because that could cut the ears off the listener. So how I do it is I would just think very carefully about something very interesting to say. Like, number one, I could say this, Joe. Ladies and gentlemen, this afternoon, I'm trying to get you to stop. Now, how am I going to do that? What can I say that will make you stop? Okay. And I could do, you know, something nutty. I could say, well, actually, I could put some glue on the floor here without telling you, couldn't I? And you'd stop. But I'm actually after your attention, you see. I'm after, and I think if you can just throw the ball into their court with your talk, you've got interactive stuff. And I just think that is the way to do it, more and more. And then as you get their attention, you open them up. Now, the other thing, let me say this, that if you do get somebody who's a bit noisy in the crowd and a bit vocal, then all of a sudden the skill of it is to become a chairman. So let's say this fellow who's half drunk is shouting at me. I'll say, thank you very much for your question. That's a great question. Now, how would you answer that? And all of a sudden the guy at this side has got to know what it's about. And then when he gives his answer, I'll go back to him and say, what do you think about that answer? And all of a sudden, I'm now a chairman. So I'm using interactions and noise to benefit what I'm doing. And the people who are my team are loving it because they're thinking, there's somebody here to talk to.
So do you think we should fear hecklers as street preachers? Should
No,
we?
not at all. Not at all.
Yeah, why though? Why?
Well, because I feel, first of all, that you're in a Christian spiritual work and sometimes the devil sends his people to discourage you, fine. But secondly, if you're gentle and wise, people looking on will say, well, I might not agree with him, but I'll tell you what, he was courteous in his manner. And that's on display. And these guys bring that out. These naughty boys who want to shout at you.
It's good.
So you can turn it to the positive.
Yeah. Vinny, last question. You might need a moment to think about this, but you get people and they say, does it even work open air? You know, do people even get saved? Can you give any examples or people who've come to faith through your personal open air or from being on a team event?
Well, first of all, beware, because that argument can mask laziness or cowardice. It's very easy not to share the gospel, isn't it? Now, Jesus often sent his disciples out and he'd say, I send you as sheep among wolves. So there is going to be a fear factor. The second thing I'd say, Joe, is most people don't go to church, so they need to hear this message. But just last week, I got a message on my phone and it came from a friend of mine in church and he said, Vinny, you won't remember this conversation, but there was a guy, let's just call him D, his name began with D, and 4 weeks ago he met you in the town centre and he's been coming to church every Sunday. Never knew, I remember the conversation, never knew, and he said he's doing Discovering Christianity, and he said, so keep going with your time in the precincts. And the benefit to the Christian as well, so young people looking on wanting something to live for then say, I want to have a go at that, I want to have a go at that. And there's lots of spin-offs. So keep at it, and if you make a bodge, learn from it.
Vinny, I remember also when we were doing a probably 2018, we were doing a team in St. Ives together, and there was two girls, and they turned up every night. I mean, we had that last year as well, but
yes.
there was, and they turned up every night to the open air, and they listened. And then I think it was the last night they said they wanted to become Christians, you know. And if we weren't out there standing on the streets at between 8 and 10 p.m., these girls who were on holiday, the parents were in the restaurant, in the pub, no one would have, you know, they wouldn't be in,
Exactly.
you know, in heaven.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Joe, well, take the illustration of St. Ives and the harbour and any beach, wherever you are, they've got something called lifeguards. And if those lifeguards just paddle around in the harbour, that's not their job. Their job is to get out where the people who are in trouble, drowning, perishing are. And we've got to go beyond our four walls. We want people in our four walls and out of our four walls. And if you think of it like this, the Christian message is to bring life. If a man goes to church, he's still carrying with him death. If he doesn't go to church, he's carrying with him death. So life has got to get to those inside and those outside.
Vinny, so if you ever hear me talking about Vinny Commons or the man who mentored me, it's this man. So if you've never seen his face before. But Vinny, just tell us, how can we pray for you and how can we find you for those who want to know a bit more about your ministry and listen to you perhaps doing some messages and ministry? Well,
Joe, I work with the Association of Evangelists, and yourself does. Also, just put my name, Vinny Commons, C-O-M-M-O-N-S, like the House of Commons, but I'm in the north, not in the south.
And he actually has that on his house. He's got a little tagline. This is, you're entering the House of Commons now.
But you can put that in and see as open air preaching. And send a question in, whatever, or get in touch, or better still, come on a team and see what we can do with you. And we're all open to learning, you know. Some guys will turn up and they'll teach us great things. So it's just great that you've got the enthusiasm. But I do have a big phrase, which Joe finds very funny, and it says, whatever you do, don't look like a Christian.
Yeah.
And sometimes, you know, the way we present ourselves might not commend the gospel, but, you know, keep the heart going. Remember, the gospel is the power. As Spurgeon said, just unleash the lion. Don't worry about it, unleash the lion.
Yeah. And I'm gonna, something I didn't tell you, so we talk about having a cup of Joe on these things. Vinny, you actually make the pots, don't you?
Oh yeah, you don't get a cup of Joe, you get the cup and Joe.
Yeah.
I'm a potter.
He's a potter, and he does that. If you'd like him at your church to come and do a message, it's brilliant. I got him at my 30th birthday party, believe it or not. And he did a talk on the potter and the clay, and it's very good for non-Christians. He gets the non-Christians up to have a go at making a pot, and then he shares the gospel, so you could get him there. But I will actually just put a little link up here on the end screen where you can find Vinny's testimony there with him making a pottery presentation. But Vinnie Commons, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Joe.
And it's been really great. God bless you all, and thank you for watching.
Thank you.